Okay, good evening. For those who have joined us this evening for our presentation. First of all, I want to welcome everybody and thank you for your time this evening to learn about our presentation of this park site master plan studies as well as the aquatic studies. Our panel this evening will be mostly run by three individuals. Brian Garvey with SFS Architecture. He's the lead architect along with Carrie Newman leading the aquatic study, but they are also working on our park site master plan study as well with some of the building design services of that project. And then Kelly Van Elders with Stantec and Josh Cheek with Stantec. Kelly is the lead architect with Stantec on the park site master plan studies. And he's also working on the aquatic study from the landscape design standpoint, along with Josh Cheek as well. Tonight's presentation is going to be specific on our park site master plan study as well as the aquatic study. Currently, right now, the park study, those two locations are Roscoe Ryder Park would be in southern Blue Springs, and Southwest Park, I'm sorry, Roscoe Ryder Park would be in southern Blue Springs off of Colburn Road, north of Colburn Road and south of Mason School Road. And Southwest Park is located off of Wyatt Road, just west of 7 Highway and north of Wyatt. Our project schedule for the so far currently, as you can see, we started the park site master plan study in January of 2020, and through February and March, we did have our first open house at that time, and then today we're at the May public meeting that we've have scheduled on our schedule here, and our intent is still to complete the study by sometime in late August. Certainly, as we go through the process a little bit further, if we need to take more time, we can certainly look at that as well. But certainly, we hope tonight's presentation will give you a good look at to kind of where we are at, where the architects have been planning and using some of the information that we've gathered through our public input processes, through surveys, as well as public meetings to provide direction and designing what they are going to be presenting this evening. As far as questions this evening, as we go through this process, if you have questions, there is a question box that you can type your questions into, and those will be addressed during each of the segments of each presentation. So as we talk about the survey results, there'll be an opportunity there for you to post questions. Questions related to the aquatic study and the park site master plan studies will be addressed, but that's all that we will address tonight for the sake of time. All other questions not related to the study will not be addressed. So if you have questions specifically about park programs or something like that, we will not address those questions. We are only going to specifically stick to questions related to these two studies. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Brian Garvey with SFS Architecture, and he'll talk about the aquatic study process at this point in time. So again, thank you for your time, and I'll turn it over now to Brian.
I'll do it. I think right now, Brian. There we go. There you are.
I had an issue there, so thank you, Dennis, and apology for that little lag. I didn't follow my own advice and hit the unmute button before I started speaking. So I'll start over. It's good to be here. I'm glad we're continuing this process. Past few months have been interesting, to say the least, about it. But we have been continuing work on. As Dennis mentioned, there's two concurrent studies that we've been working on with his team at Blue Springs. One, the aquatics master planning, to understand the needs in the community for aquatics facilities. and the other project that we're working on with Kelly and Josh and Stantec team on master planning these 2 parks. So what I wanted to review tonight, I'm going to go through this fairly briefly so we can get to the really good stuff, but did want to share some information and some feedback on the public meeting process and the public meeting that we had before the quarantine and the stay-at-home orders were issued back in late February, which feels like an eternity ago with everything that's gone on here. But at that meeting, basically we set up some boards and displays for both of the study processes at the field house. This is kind of in that open area between the fitness area on the mezzanine and the restrooms there that overlook the courts and the turf. Over the course of that day, staff from the field house was available to kind of answer questions and facilitate that public meeting. But then the design team arrived from about 3:30 until 7:30 or 8 o'clock that night, I think, kind of hitting a lot of the peak users of the facility. Over the course of that day, we estimate that we had about 140 to 150 attendees. That doesn't include people that just kind of passively walked by and took in the information and didn't really actively participate. So there was a good outreach that day. We had a couple of different types of activities where we solicited feedback at that meeting. One was a dot polling exercise on aquatics program types and aquatic features and amenities, and the other were related to the parks program side. Kelly and Josh had a really great display set up of some 360-degree camera views and video of those 2 park spaces as well, which are currently undeveloped land in Good Spring. So it was a really good engagement opportunity, and we had a lot of good conversations and gathered a lot of feedback. We gathered comment cards that were just open. A number of cards were returned even after the public meeting to the field house. We had a lot of input on the dot exercise as well. And I'm just going to go through kind of the aquatics dot exercise. Let me see if I can get this. There we go. Oh, too far. There's a little lag on my end, so I gotta be wary of hitting the button too much. So this is just indicative of the dot polling exercise on the aquatics features. And like I said, we're not going to focus much on the aquatic study tonight. We've kind of slowed that process a little bit for a couple of reasons. One is with all of the issues surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic and the strain on Parks and Rec resources. We wanted to make sure we didn't overwhelm that group. And we also wanted to make sure we were getting quality feedback from the community and not trying to push something too hard. So this is just a summary of those 6 boards that we had up that night and kind of the features. Alongside that, or kind of launching about the same time as that public meeting back in February, we had 2 different survey instruments that we used to engage the public. One was an open public survey that was conducted online through SurveyMonkey. This was available from February through April, and we used this not as a statistically valid survey, but as a way to compare the information we gathered in that online survey with the statistically valid survey. And I'll talk more about what statistically valid surveys mean. There were 12 questions. The link to the survey was on the parks. I think it was distributed on their website, their Facebook page, and then also on our project website that's set up. We had about a little less than 200 respondents that completed the survey, and we had a good spread geographically of where those respondents were coming from. So this graph, or this graphic over here on the right side, shows we had generally about 20 to 30% in each of the 4 quadrants of Blue Springs. And we identified those quadrants as north of Highway 40, north or south of Highway 40, and east or west of Highway 7. I'll go to the next slide here. So in contrast to a open online survey that anybody could take, we also commissioned and conducted what's called a statistically valid survey. And some of you may have received these in the past. They're a more formal survey instrument conducted by an outfit called ETC Institute that's located here in Kansas City, and they conduct these all over the country. When we talk about a statistically valid survey, what that means is that the survey administrator, ETC, reaches out to or they guarantee a certain number of respondents, which equals a percentage and a level of confidence in the community. So similar types of polls, or like community satisfaction surveys, or presidential polling, or political polling, and things like that. We actually received 502 respondents. They were only guaranteeing 400 to consider this a statistically valid survey, so we exceeded that. There were more questions on this, and they were more detailed. 32 questions in total, and covered all different range of topics from parks to aquatics. So if you didn't receive that, there's a reason for that. It's because it was sent to a cross-section of your community of different demographics, different age groups, different locations. Whoops. So this is just showing who that 502 respondents were. Again, by the pie charts here, you can see that it was an even distribution of household incomes, age groups, and pretty much 50-50 on gender as well. All of these things are able to be, or all contribute to what make it a statistically valid survey. So real quick, just a couple of the high points on the aquatics side of things. And like I said, we're going to focus on parks tonight rather than aquatics, but did want to give you all a little bit of feedback on what we've heard so far and how this is going to impact and inform the aquatics master plan. So two quick stats. 63% said they would use aquatics for fitness and exercise primarily. There were a number of other choices, but 63% was the top use. 46% would use aquatics for recreational swimming as opposed to fitness and exercise as well. As far as how people would use the pool, we asked what types of pool facilities or aquatic facilities do you use currently. There is a pretty large percentage that use the Blue Springs facilities, but also a large number that are using neighboring cities and private HOA pools and things like that. What we take away from this relates to another part of this process for both of these projects, and that's a market analysis that another teammate of ours, Ballard King and Associates, is conducting. And so what you do is taking the statistically valid survey, the online survey, and the market analysis, and looking at all three of those things together to understand what's the real demand and what's the real support for these types of facilities. So a couple of stats there talking about, do the current aquatics facilities or facility that the city operates, does it partly or not meet your needs? And over half of the respondents said it does not meet their needs, which is an interesting statistic, saying that we need to look at better, more diverse facilities for the community. An overwhelming percentage stated that families should be the primary user group in considerations. When we looked at desired activities and how they ranked, just real quickly, kind of a top 5, if you will, of all the various types of activities that were included in the survey. These 5 rose to the top, and really shows how it supports that family and diverse user group needs to be met. So warm water therapy, also really great for swim lessons, keep the kids engaged and not getting cold and turning their lips too purple too early. So areas for water fitness, outdoor seasonal leisure pool was a very high priority for the community, along with an outdoor spray ground. Blue Springs just recently opened a really successful themed spray ground that I'm sure you're all aware of, but it shows that there's still a need for that, and that's been a very welcome addition in the community and would be supported in the future. And then a family-oriented, warm water pool was also in the top 5. The survey addressed user frequency as well as features, and there's just a couple of quick statistics there on that of being how often the facilities would be used if it contained their preferred amenities. One other important question that we wanted to understand, again, in relation to kind of the geographical location of a facility, I think due to the kind of the success and the membership and usership at the field house, there were over 63% said that an ideal location would be near the Blue Springs field house. And this also lends itself to being operationally efficient for the city and the Parks and Rec department to run, keeping staff costs and operational costs as efficient as possible. Well over 50%, 56% of respondents indicated that Parks and Recreation improvements are a very high priority. And as we look at that online survey as well, I'd point out here we received a number of comments in just the write-in line from those folks, in addition to the community meeting that we had back in February, complimenting the city on the improvements that they've made and to not lose momentum in that regard. So an interesting takeaway from that survey as well. So kind of pause there. I don't see any questions pop up on my side. Kelly or Dennis, do you have any questions or comments that you would add to that information so far?
I don't have anything, and I don't see any questions at this time. So if you do have a question, this would be the time to type it in the question box, and we certainly would address any comments related to the survey at this time.
I'll just use some transitional slides here for those for that period, just as some indicative types of aquatic facilities that relate to these survey results. So I'm going to toss it over to Kelly to talk about the portion of the survey that addressed the parks as a lead-in to the park master plan concepts.
Thanks, Brian, and thanks all the attendees for joining us tonight. Hopefully your basements are dry and you don't have your own aquatic center in your basement. I think there are a few people that might. This is a slide to start with that really kind of garners the true sentiment of parks. That a lot of this study started before the pandemic and continued as far as the first part of it. And it just illustrates that people are active in their parks, but not only in Blue Springs, but outside of Blue Springs. Over half of the population actually uses parks outside of the city for active and passive uses. And then 87% use park facilities for families for those active and passive users. So that's one of the things we're trying to do, of course, is try to provide amenities and parks so that people can stay within the city limits. And that's why we're here tonight, is to talk about those two parks. A couple things that are interesting here to point out. Really the most popular things, people in Blue Springs like to walk. They like their walking trails. That was the #1 feature people want to see. So as you see our presentation tonight in the design, you'll see a lot of walking trails and a lot of different types of walking trails. Nature areas, places to relax. All these things are even more important today. I would guess that most people on this webinar probably attended maybe parks more recently than they have all of last year. At least I know our family, even though we're regulars to parks, we've used them even more frequently anyway. Yeah, I think that'll be illustrated as you see some more of the survey. Another thing to notice is that respondents who indicate that city parks mostly met their needs is only around 50%. That means we need to step up our game and find out, what kind of things are people looking for? Why are they going outside of the city to find it? What can we build inside the city limits to meet those needs so they don't have to go as far? And so, again, paved walking paths, nature paths, picnic facilities, festivals and fairs, and playgrounds. All of these things are things that you'll see in our designs that'll accommodate these specific features. This is some of the architecture, and Brian, you want to talk about some of the architectural components?
Yeah, no problem. So architecturally, we have two parks, obviously. We have two very different settings for these parks. While they're both undeveloped, you have one adjacent to the conservation area, Bridger Urban Conservation Area there, and the other in a more residential setting. So the architecture needs to respond not just to the functional uses that are going to be in those parks that Kelly and Josh are going to talk about, but needs to respond to the landscape and the topography and the views and setting that they're situated within. So whether that's an event space or whether that's more of a cafe space or recreational type activity center, they're going to have different responses to those conditions. Same goes for shelters. Had a little lag there on my end here, but same goes for shelters and other support facilities. They don't have to be just your off-the-shelf type thing. They can be a little more iconic, a little more memorable, contribute to the experience of going to the park, to visiting Blue Springs, and speak to the natural surrounding and the history maybe of the areas that they're situated within. So these are just some examples of what those could be. As we move forward in the planning process, we'll get a little bit more suggestive of what that story is that the architecture wants to tell in harmony with the site planning and landscape architecture.
So we're going to dive into these concept plans, and really just wanted to talk about, just thank everybody for taking the time out, and we're just really excited to share these with you, and hopefully after the presentation you'll have the same level of excitement about the opportunities and the possibilities that these sites have. So first one being Southwest Park. So everyone kind of knows, we're familiar with it. We spent a lot of time on site. It's a beautiful park. There's some great existing natural features of the site, some great tree cover. Of course, its connection to the conservation just to the west, but also some of the things that are happening within the park. It has this nice mix of some open spaces that are kind of almost like meadows, lined by trees, these water corridors that come through that really are pretty unique to Kansas City. One of the things that we notice a lot of times when we go on these sites that have these water corridors going through them, there's a big grade separation between the water level and the adjacent land. That's not the case in a lot of the moments that could happen here. There's this great proximity of the adjacent occupiable land and then the water, which could be really some special moments. And you kind of see some of those as we start to dive through this. So we're going to do in kind of a high level, talk about a few things, and then dive into these spaces in a little more detail. So again, just looking at some of the existing things that are happening, of course, Highway 7, and then Wyatt Road as your south connection into the park, 12th Street from the north and the neighborhood that's just to the north, as well as the conservation area that's just to the west, and then really thinking about the possibility of connecting further to Lake Jacomo and some of the other amenities that are around, just to create this more of a continuous trail system that really starts to link communities together. Really looking at this north-south link as a way of connecting Blue Springs north and south through this trail system. So we looked at realigning the road from its initial alignment that was being proposed, and really starting to maximize the possibilities of the site, really swinging it out to the east as we can. And what that allowed us to do is really create some areas that are very pedestrian oriented. Initially, the road was the street was direct north-south. What it started to do was divide this into two separate parts with this vehicular traffic divide, and this made it a little difficult for pedestrians, and the continuity of the park just seemed to break down. So swinging it out to the east allowed us to do that. It also allowed this water corridor to kind of be unobstructed by that, with the small crossings, which we'll get into, and the idea of really enhancing that main activity area, which we'll talk about. And then on the north, this being more of an active area, as opposed to this being more of a destination facility. And again, as we start to look at those exhibits, and we'll get into more description on that. So just from a bird's eye aerial, the park really seems to come together as a nice mix of, open green space and then these native wooded areas. And it's starting to find these places and these moments for activities to happen. Also, the great thing that starts to occur is these separate rooms, for lack of a better word, that are created within the park. And again, we'll talk about these in more detail, but really looking at the opportunities of using landform to start to indicate at special moments within the park, looking at these bridge crossings as your Instagram moments, and then obviously the connection and how this green space really starts to weave the park together and connect uses. So Brian, you want to talk about programming a little bit?
Yeah, thanks, Josh. So throughout the park, there are some architectural components, and just to hit on a couple of the ones that are kind of dispersed through the park that support your experience, are some restroom buildings, a few shelters, two that support a capacity of about 50 people, one larger one with a capacity of about 80 people. But in the center of the park, I might even back up one slide just to show the relationship. Whoops. But we're imagining an event space. There it is. So as you come into the park and that park drive swings around, as Josh was describing, we would arrive at kind of a secluded type of event space that could be used for different types of gatherings and ceremonies or corporate meetings even, and things of that sort. We're looking at two facilities that compose that kind of event area. It could be phased, so one facility could be part of the initial improvements of the park, with a second one that comes online. These would support about 200 to 250 people in kind of a banquet type setting. So imagine weddings or wedding receptions, bar mitzvahs, other types of rites of passage, different family gatherings and things of that sort. We like the idea of kind of embracing a courtyard type space or an outdoor space that's within these two buildings, and letting your views from within that building really be framed and controlled to look out at that natural landscape that's so beautiful.
So we're going to take a kind of a south to north kind of walk through this park and kind of talk about these spaces and the activities that occur in them. So we'll start at the south end, coming off 12th Street. I think this is a really special moment to create a really iconic landform within the space. We've kind of being drawn to the idea of unscripted play and unscripted activity. So providing people the opportunity to create moments. The example is this. So it's not a play field. It's just a place where people can have that unscripted play opportunity. It'd also be a great place for kind of informal amphitheater type space, potential festivals, things like that to occur. As well in the winter, a sled hill that could start to draw people to the space in the winter. And that's one of the things that we're thinking about on these parks, is not just how is it used in the summer, but how is it used all seasons, making sure that we're providing those opportunities for people to get out and engage in the park system. So just south of that landform, parking lot to kind of accommodate some of those uses, shelter that's kind of gets tucked into the woods here, And it also becomes a jumping off point to jump into the trails and start to connect into that bigger trail system that we mentioned. Again, looking at enhancing that creek edge and just what is that relationship between this lawn space, a little more native edge, and then that creek. As we move a little farther north, you can see those lawn spaces start to connect with this bridge. So it's really, it could be again a special moment and that opportunity to have a really another iconic feature within the park. Again, also engaging that water and looking for places to get down and get close to it, we think is important. You know, it's that moment where you're able to get down the water's edge and physically engage in it is kind of critical. And it also, this park has that unique opportunity to do that. Starting to locate some of the shelters along that with starting to enlarge some water areas, so some damming with some small falls, and then that allows some water to pool up and create that kind of moment adjacent to the shelter. Open lawn to the north that starts to relate to this group of building. And I think the key here, as Brian has talked about, is flexibility. We're not really thinking of designing this for one event. So really looking at how we start to organize the spaces so that if someone wanted to rent the whole space out, it works. If it's just one building, it doesn't feel like, you know, it doesn't feel odd or strange. The flexibility of it is really important, and its engagement into the walks and into the wooded area is really important. Again, also thinking about time of day. So, you know, the idea of being able to come along that trail and have that shelter, that's that visual that you see through the trees, lighting up at night, and just trying to create those opportunities for people.
Yeah, one thing I would add, Josh, is just the general support that kind of creates as a hub there in the middle of the site. That building, when there's not an event going on, may have restrooms that are accessible to the park users. It really becomes again another iconic piece, another moment in that park that's significant as both a visual component, but also as a support component to the overall park.
So one of the other great things about the park when we're out on site is there's kind of a flat area up here, and then the elevation starts to really drop off as it gets to another creek on the north side of the property. And so looking at that site narrative and how people are engaging in the site, we thought it would be a really great opportunity to create the notion of this tree walk. So the idea of getting up in the tree canopy, similar to this image on the right-hand side, where people could get in directly off this path. So there's really no elevation change. You're not climbing up in a tower to access this. You're coming off at grade, and then you're up in the trees, kind of making this meandering walk, and then back out. And then the idea of the bike trails and the walking trails kind of weaving underneath that, and just creating that experience of both from up on the tree walk and then down on the bike trail, and just how those two things start to weave together could be really exciting, and a really great thing that Blue Springs could have that really no one in the region has. And then kind of supporting that with a play structure, some other really unique play moments, as well as potential for a pump track. And the idea of that is the notion of these bike trails can get a little technical, and it's that learning factor that we think is important. So it's the idea of introduce and learn, and then practice, and then explore this bike trail system. Another thing that we're really cognizant of just with the survey was the notion of hard path or the paved pathways, and making sure we have these shared use paths that are connecting all of the features of the park as well. So those connecting down to the south into the parking areas, as well as up into the neighborhood to the north. So again, the north side, just kind of continuing those bike trails, those moments where it can cross water, making sure that we have those connections up to the neighborhood to the north. You can kind of see how that tree walk really starts to jut out here. There's a really great moment here aesthetically with the natural features, and really trying to maximize that and finding those elevated moments where you can really enjoy and embrace those types of spaces. Again, the notion of hard spaces as well as the more native spaces as native trails, and then the notion of some more technical elements that could be incorporated into the bike system as well. So that was our kind of first look at Southwest Park. Does anybody have any questions? See, there's one from Jerry. The middle of the walkways, is it just green space or for anything special? If you're kind of referring to these open green spaces, we wanted to keep them pretty flexible. They're not really programmed for anything specific. They're kind of meant to be allowing the city and the public to kind of program as they need fit. And then on this south side, again, that notion of that landform being multi-use.
So, for example, the landform could be used for sledding. It could be a sled hill in the winter, and faces north, and very well could be for that use, as well as just playing around and rolling down a hill. So, really wanted to keep it flexible and unprogrammed.
Yeah, and another thing that we've noticed on other sled hills that have been completed is a lot of people like to use them for stargazing because it's just that nice elevation, and the kind of sloped area allows you to get that. You're not looking straight up, you get that view. So could be great for that as well.
Yeah. And so just to clarify, Jerry, that there won't be any sports programmed on this park, on this site. This is really more meant to be flexible and have a lot of open space and not have any programmed sports activities.
Okay. No other questions. We'll move on to Roscoe Ryder. So Roscoe Ryder, our first time out there, has a much different aesthetic. It's been used for farmland for a while. There's some existing trees, but it's a much flatter site with less elevation change over a bigger area. There's a big tower moment that occurs on the side as well. So we went back and forth about how to utilize that, whether to screen that or embrace it. So you'll start to see that in some of the designs as well. So again, that high level, looking at how we're starting to organize the space. And I'm going to back up to real quick just to talk about, there is a right-of-way that connects up to the street to the north of the park. And so there's an opportunity to connect there as well, to have two ways in and out of the park. So we really started to think about just how do people want to engage in this park from a vehicular standpoint, and then from a pedestrian standpoint as well. And when do those points need to happen, and what makes sense. So you can kind of see there's a curvilinear drive, starts at the south at the existing, kind of swings around and really starts to embrace the west side, and then go ahead and connects to the north. So there's that through movement all the way through the park. It started to set up this great large civic green space that started to look at a building kind of being the terminus of that space, and that being the jumping off point for some of the activities that could occur behind. There's kind of a south parking and a north parking. And the reason that we did that, a couple reasons. One was just to provide the number of parking that we thought was appropriate, but also the ability to go ahead and shut this off. So if there was a large festival event that could occur in this space, maybe there's food trucks parked along this drive, but people could come in and park in the parking from the south or the north and go ahead and block off that drive to through traffic. We looked at on the east side, it being a little more natural, and you see some of those things that we'll show as we start to look into the spaces in a little more detail, and just the idea of bringing some native landscape back into the park. So you can see how the aerial starts to set up large lawn space that could really start to be programmed in some exciting ways. Festivals, events, maybe this is a screen set up at the building for movie night in the park. It just becomes this moment and this backdrop for this space, whether it's a stage set up for a concert or just the everyday people getting out and enjoying the park space. Start to see that tower element and how it starts to fit into the architecture and the massing of this space, the activity that occurs here, and then this native that's starting to occur back there. And we got some image of that. This is a really exciting space that we think could be a moment that a lot of people come just to see that. So, Brian, we'll talk about that program.
Yeah, so in the heart of this park, a much more I would say active hub and center of this park. While the other one's more of a support space and it has its uses while multifunctional and multi-purpose, this activity center is a little bit different. And as we talk about some of the surrounding activities here, that'll come into focus a bit more. But what we're looking at right now from an overall standpoint is about a 16,000 square foot activity center. That center would include maybe some small meeting rooms, not to the extent of an event space or a banquet hall or something like that, but probably more along the lines of 50 to 60 people maximum there. We think a cafe makes a lot of sense to bring something like that into the picture, where you have this very active park setting, and you could have a space with some indoor-outdoor seating, serving coffee, prepackaged goods, and maybe even alcoholic beverages, depending on how things move forward there. As this is an activity center, we're looking at recreational opportunities, so maybe having a few indoor pickleball courts and a few outdoor pickleball courts. So if anyone's been to Chicken and Pickle in North Kansas City, kind of a similar idea as that. And then as Josh talks about some of the other uses adjacent to this, skate rental and storage, and some other outdoor seating around that activity building. Shelters throughout the park, looking at the majority of them being about a capacity of about 50 people, with, again, one larger one, maybe around that 80-person capacity, plus or minus there. Josh?
Okay. So we'll work from the south to north again and just talk about the park as we move through. Looking at coming in along the park drive, opportunity for a monument sign to occur in that location, really signifying the entry and arrival into the park. This is a pretty level area, and it's a great opportunity to have an open lawn that could be more for pickup games. We really don't have anything in either one of these parks that is a dedicated baseball, soccer field or anything of that nature, but it's more of these opportunities for impromptu pickup games and the like of that. So you can start to see how some of these trails are connecting the greater kind of the major system, and making sure that we're understanding how we need to engage the elementary school to give the opportunity for the surrounding neighborhoods to utilize the park as a way to get to school. Making sure that these shared use paths start to reinforce that as well. And again, this open lawn space, I feel it's a really dramatic form. It starts to really set up for what was kind of identified in the survey as possible festival fair space, but also just the everyday use of this. And we really are kind of intrigued with the notion of this existing tree massing coming through here, just the opportunity for people to come out for hammocking, to just get in the shade on a hot summer day, instead of having just the only be just that open lawn space. So there's something really intriguing about that, as well as this notion of the the native grass areas, and it's that mix of walks, the native grasses, and then the more mown typical turf adjacent to that. Using that shared use path is kind of that maintenance edge to separate the native from the more manicured. Again, understanding from the survey, there was a lot of interest in shelters, so locating a variety of different shelters, different opportunities for people to engage in those. There's a small parking that's off of the neighborhood that's only accessed through that neighborhood, just giving the people in that neighborhood the opportunity to drive and access that shelter as well. Parking to the south, parking to the north with the main arrival plaza at the front of the building, looking at a bosque of ornamental trees or something to really set that off as a special moment. And then we'll get into it a little further, but it's that idea of the potential for a dog park to the north. So you can see movie night. You can see this idea of really the building starting to engage this active space. And then as we move through the building, this really becomes the central plaza and activity zone of the park. It's really consolidated and in one spot. Parking, long drop off on this area, and that's looking at the possibility, again, for maybe there's a small festival that's occurring in this area. Maybe food trucks can line up along this as well. And then this would be a water feature. And when we say water feature, we're thinking of something that's only 6 inches deep. You know, maybe people can walk through it if they're so inclined. Maybe it has some LED lights in the bottom that are, you know, maybe they pop to start to look like fireflies. So it's something more in this vein. It's not, you know, it's not the Bellagio where you have the big jets popping up, but it's that subtle opportunity for people to walk kind of in and around water feature and really engage in it. As we move to the north, we have some open lawn spaces, again, locating shelters, looking at some adventure course for older adults and older kids, an identity play structure, and all these things are kind of located around this, what we're terming the multi-season loop. And so we have some experience with looking at ice ribbons and ice loops and how those engage people in an unexpected way as opposed just to a sheet of ice that people skate around. So looking at that would be the seasonal use in the winter. But in the summer, looking at, you know, the opportunity to get jets of water, it becomes, you know, a water splash pad. It becomes a roller skating loop for that as well. And then engaging with some rock climbing that could be interior to this in the island of the loop, and then kind of bridge over it on the outside as well. Located a seasonal hut that could be cake grinnells, or it could be a warming in the winter, and then a cooling station in the summer.
Josh, I wanted to address a question that came up from Keith, who's viewing the presentation, asking, would the cafe and rental area require extra staff and supervision? The answer to that is yes, obviously that would, but that could be addressed a number of different ways. I think the goal of Blue Springs and any of the projects they're going after is, in a situation like this in particular, trying to be 100% cost sustainable or cost recovery. So they need to look at the financial plan associated with those elements. Another way to address that without city staff is to form a partnership potentially with a private operator that may come in and facilitate that operation.
As we move from that more active area, there's an existing tree massing, and that really creates a nice division and separation between this more active use and what we're looking at is this native grasses and a field of flowers. And it really becomes a moment that really people can have an experience that maybe is unexpected, or maybe they're going just for this experience, but it's that sense of place and trying to create something that people really can engage in multiple ways. So looking at, again, this idea of these shelters getting tucked into these areas, shared use paths that allow people to move through. But this would really be this moment that would just be this monoculture of a single flowering native. You know, maybe there's the idea we can start to mow these paths, and maybe those are seasonal. So every year there's a different pattern. There's a different way of experiencing the site and moving through the site. There's this opportunity to create these picnic moments that are out in the flowers, as well as just that iconic view across. The site's really set up really great. This is higher over here, and there's a gradual grade fall this way. And as we look at, you know, the festival plaza and being here, you know, maybe there's an opportunity to have a moment on top of this building where you're looking across this space around these trees, and then you're getting that peak of those flowers in the backdrop. So it could be a really special space. We're pretty excited about just the opportunities that could occur there. Moving to the north, parking, making sure that's one of the things that we really worked with. We didn't want a drive to really cut through this space. We wanted to keep it pedestrian only and bike only, but the idea of getting parking out here as close as we thought was reasonable to allow people that were less mobile to experience the space as well was really important to us. So you'll start to see those on the north and south side that start to connect through these trees into this vehicular circulation system. Some of the existing utilities on site, making sure we're still providing access to those, and then that tower becoming an iconic element of the site. Looking at the dog park and kind of tucking it back behind these natives, open area dog park here, and then extending that dog park under the trees. That's one thing that's really important as we start to look at our design of dog parks, is making sure that there's that opportunity for shade. And this has a great opportunity with some trees that are already there. Shelter as well, and then that shared use path that comes around. The idea of potentially connecting to the north and west at some point with a middle school that's proposed there. And then the road connecting to the north and that shared path coming through as well to the north. So does anybody have any questions about Roscoe Ryder concept?
All right. Well, certainly if anybody has any questions, we'll hang in here just a couple more minutes, but that is our presentation for this evening. And just want to take this time to thank everybody this evening for joining us. We are going to put this information on the website that's listed here at the bluespringsmo.weebly.com. That website is specific to our studies. We will load this information on there. If you do have further comments, you can leave those comments there. I believe we're looking also at having a couple boards here at the field house to allow the public to look at that and view that and provide some additional feedback as we continue to work through this process. As we work towards completing the study, we'll, like I said, update the plans on our website, as well as any future potential meetings will be announced on that, as well as our social media platforms. But this concludes our presentation this evening, unless somebody has any additional questions. So again, thank you for joining us this evening. We do have a question, so let's see. Very interesting. Are there other parks that are planned for ball field soccer space and other sporting activities? Currently at this time, our focus has been on these two parks. We've looked at what our needs are within the community at this point in time. There seems to be at this point with kind of where we're at adequate space for that, but certainly we have some other parkland that we could potentially identify for ball fields and things like that. We have an area at Grounds Park on the north side that's fairly flat that would lend itself to potentially building some practice fields at that location. We just felt that both these sites added some unique features that typically don't lend itself as well to ball fields, and more of a natural setting and trying to be more of a community park than a sports park at this point. But certainly we do have other parkland that we can look at those opportunities if it's presented itself. Other questions? All right, if not, that concludes our presentation. Again, thank you for joining us, and we will have this presentation, like I said, the plans and stuff available at the field house, and look forward to any feedback. If you do have any feedback, feel free to email our Parks Department at any time with your questions or comments, and we'll be certain to pass those on to our architects and as we continue to finalize the study. But thanks everybody for joining, and have a great evening and stay safe. Thank you.